Hey everybody, this is Mr. Moffman coming back at you again. This is APUS History, focusing in on topic 4.3, Politics and Regional Interests. Now, with this particular video, it's going to seem like we're kind of fast-forwarding a little bit in time chronologically. It kind of seems like for the moment that we're kind of just zipping right through the Madison presidency. But don't worry, we will get to that. We really focus on Madison as part of the greater foreign policy matters of the early 19th century. So don't worry, we'll get there. But before we do get there, we do have to talk about the guy that is going to be following James Madison as the 5th president of the United States, and that is this individual right here, James Monroe. James Monroe is going to be leading the United States domestically domestically during an era that we're going to call the era of good feelings. And it gets this nickname because of the collapse of the Federalist Party a few years earlier, and now entering into this era where the Democratic Republicans have won the fight against the Federalists, and there is no other political party opposition. It's the only time in American history where there's really one party rule in this country. Now, it doesn't even really last a decade, but it is an important era. Now, that being said, don't let the moniker era of good feelings, throw you off. Don't think that this is a time of, all the political leaders in America holding hands and sitting around the campfire singing Kumbaya. Far from it. What it actually does is expose the next area of divisiveness in America. It's not going to be so much between political parties, at least at the moment, but clearly revealing differences of opinion based on regional interests. And that's really going to be the focus of this video and the next one. How growing regional interests, be it the North, the South, and the West, are going to be coming into conflict in terms of what kind of policies the federal government is going to be crafting. So, that being said, before we get into some of the things that do divide this country regionally, a few other items with regards to James Monroe that you might want to be familiar with. For example, Monroe is going to be the last of the Revolutionary War era presidents. Monroe was a veteran of the Revolutionary War. He served under Washington. Those of you that may be familiar with the Lutza painting of Washington crossing the Delaware, you might remember one guy that's holding an American flag up on the boat. Well, that's supposed to be James Monroe. And, keep in mind, James Monroe has been around quite a bit. Remember, he was, part of the delegation that dealt with with France with the XYZ affair and the Louisiana Purchase. He's been around a long time, and he's also part of this greater Virginia dynasty that defined 4 of the first 5 presidencies: Washington, Jefferson, Madison, and now Monroe, all coming from Virginia. And once again, to give you a sense of, kind of unanimity in terms of political party affiliation, with no real Federalist opposition, Monroe is going to be able to win in 1860 and in 1820 by massive, massive margins that we had not seen since Washington ran for office almost a generation earlier. And this is coinciding with a growing sense of American nationalism in this country. One of the key effects of the War of 1812 is that it's going to promote the beginning of the sense of people in this country truly calling themselves Americans, as opposed to the more provincial notion of identifying oneself based on what state they lived in. So you're starting to see, with the conclusion of the War of 1812, a decline in people identifying themselves as New Yorkers and Virginians and Ohioans, for example, and starting to call themselves Americans. But that being said, though, regionalism is going to really play a major role in the debates, in the divides, in terms of what American domestic policy should be. And one of these areas of focus is going to be on the economy, and debates about, what kind of purpose should tariffs have. And with money that we do bring in with tariff money, kind of money we bring in with tariffs, what should it be spent on? Should we be spending it on infrastructure? Should we be spending it on education? What should we be doing with this kind of money? And of course, this plays into the bigger debate of what should be the size of the federal government. So, with that being said, one of the first areas of contention, and this is actually going back to the Madison administration, is the Tariff of 1816. Now, the Tariff of 1816 comes as a result of the War of 1812, and now that the war was over, there was a sense that the British are going to start to flood American markets with cheap British industrial-made goods. Remember, the British have got a head start on the United States and pretty much everybody else in the Industrial Revolution. So you're starting to see mass-produced products over in England now potentially come over to the United States and once again undercut American businesses. Well, the Tariff of 1816 is designed to address that, because the Tariff of 1816 is not just about having a mechanism to bring in money for the federal government, which is what traditionally tariffs were. It was a revenue-generating thing, but it's also going to be designed to specifically be protective in nature. In other words, putting a tax on these foreign goods, in particular British goods, for the purpose explicitly of allowing American products to be sold at a cheaper rate. Now, this is going to really start to divide the country in terms of tariffs. Tariffs are going to be very much supported in the North, and that's going to be because that's going to be the growing heart of American manufacturing. So if you're talking about New England, you're talking about New York, Philadelphia, those places, they are very pro-tariff. Conversely, in the South, Southerners are going to be opposed to tariffs. The South does not really have much development in terms of manufacturing. They don't own these businesses that are involved in international trade. They are farmers. They are an agrarian society. They're providing the raw cotton for textile mills up north, but they are not owning the manufacturing process. So what does this mean? Tariffs are going to be controversial in the South because anytime that you apply tariffs to a product, prices for everything goes up. So, for example, if you have a British pair of shoes that would normally be sold for $5 a pair, and the cheapest American competition is going to be $7 a pair, but with an American tariff of $4 on those British shoes, the British shoes now go up to $9 versus the $7 American pair of shoes. Well, remember, this is capitalism, so it's not just about making a profit, it's about maximizing your profit. So if you know that your closest competitor can't sell it for less than $9 a pair, well, you're going to raise yours to just under that. So you're going to raise it to, say, $8 a pair. So what used to be something that was a $5 versus a $7 choice for consumers is now a $9 versus an $8 choice for consumers. And even though, yes, you would logically choose the cheaper American shoe, your choices are much more expensive than they were pre-tariff. So tariffs are going to be affecting Southern consumers in a more negative way than Northern business owners with regards to the tariffs. So understand, this is just the beginning of what's going to be dividing the nation on the issue of tariffs. Now, beyond that, the question being, if we do have tariffs, and if we are increasing the tariffs in terms of the percentage of tax and therefore the amount of money coming in for the federal government, what should we do? Well, that then brings in a guy named Henry Clay. Now, Henry Clay is going to be a name that's going to be around for a long time. He's going to be bounced around throughout this entire unit and into the first part of Unit 5's. Henry Clay is going to be, probably after, I would say, Jackson and Jefferson, the most significant politician of the first half of the 19th century. Now, that's just my opinion. He is not quite as famous as Jackson and Jefferson because, spoiler alert, he never becomes president of the United States. But he is going to earn the moniker of the moniker known as the Great Compromiser, because as somebody from the West, or at least what was defined as the West at the time, Kentucky, he's going to be able to bring together things to try to bring the North and the South together. He's definitely going to be a nationalist for sure at a time where regionalism is starting to become more and more apparent. And as evidence of this, Henry Clay is going to be a big supporter of protective tariffs, bring in more revenue for the federal government, and then spend that money wisely. Now, what do you spend that money on? Well, Henry Clay is going to be a believer in something that he calls the American system. And the idea behind that is using increased federal revenue to expand roads, to actually create federally funded and maintained roads. Up to this point, this is all done on a state and local basis. So the idea is let the federal government use its money, have national roads, connects the nation more. That's going to help with trade. It's a really good thing. He also believed in spending that money on having federal universities, even promoting a federal space observatory. So Henry Clay, in many respects, is kind of a forward-thinking politician for the early 19th century. He's kind of envisioning a much more modern federal government that we are accustomed to, as opposed to what existed at that time. And that's going to make him a bit controversial because, you know, with these early presidents such as Madison and Monroe, they're going to be opposed to it. You know, Madison and Monroe are going to be like their predecessor Jefferson. They're all going to be believers in relatively small federal government. And the idea being is, if it's not something that the federal government absolutely has to do, then they shouldn't be doing it. It should be left up to the states to do it themselves. And that involves infrastructure, education, you know, scientific research, etc., etc. So, you know, Henry Clay's American system is going to get torpedoed by both Madison and Monroe. But this is not going to be the end of Clay's attempts to try to promote this American system in terms of federal infrastructure spending. In addition to that, not a big surprise, since this is a guy that's very much pro-business and a nationalist, he's going to be in support of the Bank of the United States. In 1816, the bank is going to be up for a rechartering. The bank had a previous 20-year charter, so that charter's come up. He is going to be one of the advocates in supporting the renewal of the Bank of the United States, and it will get rechartered. This, of course, is one of the more interesting twists in this early part of American history, because, you know, the very party that was, you know, the faction that was opposed to the bus, Jefferson's Democratic Republicans, end up being, you know, since they were the only party left, basically, still keeping this thing alive, even though there's no more Federalist Party anymore. So that is kind of interesting. Now, another area of concern is going to be the Panic of 1819. The Panic of 1819 is going to be the beginning of what will be, seemingly almost every generation, some sort of a noticeable, significant economic downturn. And as we get from here all the way to the Great Depression over a century later, these economic downturns are going to become, over time, gradually more severe. But still, though, even in their own time, these panics, for example, like this one in 1819, is still going to be very problematic. So what's going to be happening? Well, the Bank of the United States, remember, is going to have tremendous power in terms of affecting the monetary policy of the United States. And one of the things that it tried to fend off was growing inflation. In other words, you know, quickly rising prices. And so what happened was that the Bank of the United States started to, you know, reduce significantly the amount of loans that they would put out for people trying to purchase land. At the same time, they also called in a number of loans in terms of those that owed the bank money, especially those that operated farms. Well, when that happens, these farmers did not have the ability to pay the bank, and so many of these farms were foreclosed on by the Bank of the United States. And what this does is lead to even more of a regional divide on this institution of the Bank of the United States. Northerners believed that the bank was important and vital to create, you know, a sound currency and a sound economy. But more and more Southerners and Westerners are growing, you know, distrustful of the Bank of the United States, believing that it was really out for its own goals as a financial institution rather than looking at the big picture needs of all Americans, in particular rural farming Americans. And, you know, this is going to become a major divisive issue, especially when we see Andrew Jackson coming into the White House a few years later. So we will leave it there for now, and we'll pick it up next time. We'll see you then.